Good morning. Welcome to the First Universalist Church of Rochester, where we are called to nurture the spirit and serve the community. Whoever you are welcome here. Wherever you come from, you are welcome here. Whomever you love, you are welcome here. Whatever blunders you may have made, you are welcome here. All are welcome here. It is good to be together this morning. We acknowledge with respect the Seneca Nation, keepers of the Western Door and part of the Haudenosaunee people on whose ancestral lands First Universalist now stands. Welcome to the First Universalist Church, where we are worshiping in a not so new it's becoming way, both in person and online. If you are here for the first time this morning, we especially welcome you. Thank you for making it to this worshiping community. We have a visitors form that can be found in the chat for our online folks, and it can be found in the pews for the people in person. Please fill out the form so that we can offer you a welcome beyond this service. Before we take a moment to turn to our neighbor, let us take a moment to turn towards the camera and extend a wave to greet our worshiping community. So let's offer a wave. And if you are online, please pop into the chat and offer a greeting and share your joys and sorrows. And if you are here at First Universalist now, let us take a moment to turn to our neighbor this morning and offer a greeting. Let us sing together hymn number 347, Gather the Spirit.
celebrate once again. Gather the Spirit growing in all, drawn by the moon and fed by the sun, winter to spring and summer to fall, the chorus of God resounding as one. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then, gather in hope, compassion and strength, gather to celebrate once again.
Good morning. I'm Johanna Conley, Worship Associate for today. This is a reading called A Place of Belonging and Caring by Kimberly Ann Tomczak Carlson. It is not by chance that you arrived here today. You've been looking for something larger than yourself. Inside of you, there's a yearning, a calling, a hope for more, a desire for a place of belonging and caring. Through your struggles, someone nurtured you into being, instilling a belief in shared purpose, a common yet precious resource that belongs to all of us when we share. And so you began seeking a beloved community, a people that does not put fences around love, a community that holds its arms open to possibilities of love, a heart home to nourish your soul and your gifts. Welcome home. Welcome to worship. Would Eileen Fernandez please come forward and light our chalice? And will you join me here and at home in saying our chalice words in unison? May we be a people of welcome, here to grow in heart, mind, and spirit. And may we reach out to serve our community. Please rise, body or spirit, and join me in our affirmation of faith, followed by our doxology. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls grow into harmony with the source and meaning of life. Thus do we covenant with each other and with all. Thank you. A religious community is like a river formed from the many streams of our lives that meet and merge and flow to the sea. As members and friends of this religious community, we share our time and energy, our creativity, imagination, and vision, our talents, skills, and gifts, and the streams of our individual lives to create a river that is both deep and broad. A river that's made of many streams sustains life and refreshes the land through which it flows. But the river of this community also depends on our shared financial support that makes real our shared values and vision. We'll now receive an offering for the support of this religious community and its work in the world. You're invited to give generously and joyfully as you are willing and able. You're invited to give online by scanning the QR code in your pews or the one in the back of the order of service, or to drop an offering in the basket. For folks online, please click the link in the chat to give to First Universalist. Thank you for your generosity. Guess what happened? Not enough faith. I think I'm done. Yeah, I think you are. We didn't do that yet, do we? God. Oh, yeah. I'm looking down.
I invite you now into this reverent time of the sharing of joys and sorrows of our gathered community. If you would like to, you can place a hand over your heart to be able to listen from this heart-centered place. As we place stones in the bowl, we will honor the joys and sorrows of our gathered community online. There weren't any in the book from those in person. All are invited to share your joys and sorrows in the chat that we may hear from the community gathered here. We did have one anonymous joy. Glad that Nicholas and Mary Nicosia are being held accountable for their racist behaviors and words. Grateful for the local organizations that have cut ties with them following the revealing of their abhorrent behavior. Waiting and hoping for justice for Jared Jones, the local firefighter who was put into a terrible and heart-wrenching situation. I will share joy that as always, it's been a great joy to be here this summer. This is my last Sunday, so I always say, like white shoes, I go away at Labor Day. But it's always an honor and a joy to do that. It is my absolute favorite thing that I do all year, and it's such an honor that year after year you entrust me with this very important and very sacred job. So thank you. And we drop one final stone into the bowl to represent all the joys and sorrows left unspoken in the silent sanctuaries of our hearts. May all be held in the heart of love. I invite you now to join with me in a spirit of prayer and meditation. Blessed are we who gather with open hearts together in this space or online today. Blessed are we, the chalice lighters of resistance, justice, love, and faith. Blessed are we, the heretics, the outcasts, the walkers of our own way. Blessed are we, the border crossers, the refugees, the immigrants, the poor, those who wander but are not lost. Blessed are we, the transgressors, the trespassers, the passers-by, the cause takers, the defiant, the compliant. Blessed are we, the hand extenders, the sign makers, the protesters, the protectors. Blessed are we, the trans women, the trans men, the non-binary, the cisgender, the multigender, and the no gender. Blessed are we, the friend, the stranger, the lonely, the hidden, the visible, the authentic. Blessed are we, the well-meaning blunderers, whose words sometime unintentionally offend. Blessed are we who rise in solidarity. Blessed are we who cannot, and blessed are we who do not. Blessed are we, for this is our beloved community, and this is who we are. Amen. Blessed be. May it be so. So by way of a little bit of education here, although most people here probably know this, but the Unitarian Universalist denominations has two seminaries. We have two seminaries of our very own. One is the Starr King School for the Ministry in Berkeley, California, and the other is the Meadville Lombard Theological School at the University of Chicago. I went to Meadville Lombard in the late 1990s. Meadville Lombard, like so many institutions of higher learning these days, has become an online program in recent years. But in my day, it was a good old-fashioned residential program, and I spent 3 years living and studying there. Even then, however, they did have a distance learning program for people who couldn't uproot their entire lives and move to Chicago for 3 years. It was called the Modified Residency Program. As part of this program, every January between the semesters, Meadville-Lombard had a 3-week program called Winter Intensives. The distance learners came for those 3 weeks to Chicago, and they took 3 classes, 1 per week. They did this to kind of get some in-person FaceTime with the faculty and to get to know some of the residential students like me. And we residential students were encouraged and allowed to take these intensive classes as well, and I always took full advantage of the opportunity in the years that I was there. Now, there was a third group of people welcome to take these classes as well. Prospective students, people who had not yet applied to the school and had not yet received the green light from the denomination to pursue ministry. These people were encouraged to take classes as well. They were really a great way for people to get a taste of seminary life, and for those still pondering Unitarian Universalist ministry, to help them discern, was this the right path for them? Well, it's been about 25 years since I went to Meadville-Lombard, so I've honestly forgotten most of the classes. In fact, I was just cleaning out the attic and I found an old catalog and I looked through it and thought I must have taken a lot of these classes, but I don't remember them. However, there is one winter intensive that has remained with me, especially because of the unfortunate experience that one prospective student had in front of the class. His name was Fred, and it was obvious right from the introductions on the very first day that Fred was a bit out of his depth. I am guessing that he was probably in his mid to late 40s at the time, so he would have been born probably in the late 1940s or early 1950s. He had taken some classes at the local community college over the years, but he had no degree. His family owned a dairy farm, and Fred's entire career up until this point had been mostly working on this dairy farm in a small town in Iowa, I think, as I recall, in the middle of the state somewhere. He had been raised a traditional Lutheran, and at one point he had been quite devout. Yet, in spite of this rather limited and somewhat stereotypically conservative background, at some point in Fred's adult years, he had found himself questioning his faith and questioning the political values of those around him. And somehow, he had found his way to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in his small Iowa town. And it was there, while he was attending this fellowship, that Fred decided that he had a call to ministry. Like so many of us raised in more traditional churches and felt like we didn't fit in, Fred described the feeling as if he had come home theologically when he discovered Unitarian Universalism, a feeling that I share and an experience that I could really relate to. Now, probably not surprisingly, this homecoming had not pleased his parents or the rest of his family. However, Fred said that as he became more and more outspokenly liberal about both his theology and his politics, that he had paid a heavy social price. He was looking to leave this world behind him, both philosophically and physically, and this winter intensive class that he was in was a fairly big step for him. He had never been to Chicago before. He had never traveled by himself before, and we learned at dinner that first evening he had never used chopsticks before. He wore Carhartts and plaid shirts. He looked to me like a farmer from Iowa. The theme of this class was the use of literature in worship. During the course of the week, we were given writing assignments as well as assignments to find pieces of literature that we could use for worship. The first writing assignment I do remember very well, and it was to do a piece of nature writing. I recall that I described the unexpected random beauty of the untended weeds in my neglected Rochester yard. And I talked about the way spiders made nests in the corners of my front porch. Fred's writing piece was quite good. In fact, it kind of stunned people, and it drew praise from the class. He wrote about what dawn was like on an Iowa farm, describing in some detail watching the nocturnal creatures disappear at the beginning of the day, while the daytime creatures came to life. One woman in the class who had a degree in creative writing felt that Fred's piece was worthy of publishing. I remember that Fred had an open vulnerability about him and a complete lack of facade, which again, I stereotypically in my mind talked up to his rural farming background. It wasn't so much as if he didn't care what other people thought of him. It was more as if he were blissfully unaware that people observed him or made judgments of him at all. We've all, I think, met people like this, and their vulnerability can be almost disarming. And this quality that Fred had of not understanding or seeming to be aware of the fact that people were making judgments about him, it was reciprocal. He showed open and unabashed enthusiasm for everything his classmates shared as well. He seemed, from what I could see, to make few judgments. He didn't always seem to get the point that other people were trying to make, but he was not reticent or shy at all about making this clear. Fred truly wanted to understand. Our teacher, whose name I have honestly forgotten, was a visiting minister from out of state, and she clearly struggled to keep her cool with Fred at these moments. Fred's questions did suck up a bit more time than other people's, and he clearly lacked the experience and education that the rest of the people in the class had, so he often needed to have things explained to him that the rest of the class took for granted. But everyone got along well enough, and things went well enough overall until Children's Literature Day. On this day, we had each been asked to bring in our favorite children's book, one that we ourselves had enjoyed as children, not one that we had discovered later in life. That was an important part of the assignment. I chose A Child's Garden of Verses, a collection of children's poems by Robert Louis Stevenson. One woman brought in Stuart Little, and I recall that more than one person, several people actually, brought one of the Little House series of books by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Fred's choice, unfortunately, proved a fatal error, and it was his undoing with our teacher. So all morning, Fred sat open-faced, patiently and appreciatively nodding and smiling through presentations of Little House on the Prairie, Little House in the Big Woods, Little Town on the Prairie, On the Banks of Plum Creek, as well as Corduroy, Little Bear's First Kiss, and Bread and Jam for Francis, as well as my Robert Louis Stevenson presentation, until finally, it was his turn. Now, I do recall that his was the last presentation scheduled before lunch, and my intuition told me that our teacher had given him this slot deliberately so that she would have a compelling reason to tell him to wrap things up if she felt that it wasn't up to the standards she had set for the class. Well, if that had been her thinking, it turned out that it wasn't even necessary at all, because Fred did not even get to start before she cut him off. Unfortunately, Fred had chosen Walt Disney's Uncle Remus stories for his presentation. He had barely raised up his careworn copy, and it was the actual copy that he had used as a child when the teacher stopped him in his tracks. "Fred, I'm sorry, but I cannot let you present that book. In fact, I am surprised you would even think that book was appropriate for this class at all," she said. Fred was clearly blindsided. He had absolutely no idea why our teacher was saying what she was saying. I'm afraid I don't see the problem, Fred said. Clearly exasperated, the teacher replied, well, that's a big part of the problem, isn't it? You should see the problem. The problem should be obvious. It should be so obvious that you would have known that that book is highly offensive and has absolutely no place in this class. Fred's face was now quite red. He clearly understood that he had committed a faux pas. It wasn't his first one that week. There had been several, but he also saw that this one was different and that this one was far more serious than when he had expressed that he would like to try sushi when we went to Chinatown one night. I don't understand, he said again. I love this book. My mother read this book to me all the time. We were supposed to bring our favorite book from childhood. Why is it inappropriate? There's nothing sexual in it. Our long-suffering teacher bit her lip and rolled her eyes to the ceiling. I shouldn't even have to explain this, she said. It should be obvious to anyone contemplating UU ministry, and I find it quite troubling that you don't see the problem. Finally, another member of the class chimed in, and she supplied the answer. It's racist, she said. The Uncle Remus stories are racist, horribly, blatantly racist, and I agree with the teacher. I am offended that you brought that here, and it scares me that someone like you wants to be a UU minister. After this, a few other of my classmates piled on, each one excoriating Fred's choice of book. A few of them going almost as far as basically accusing him of being an unabashed racist. It's 1998, one classmate said. There is absolutely no excuse for you not understanding just how racist that book is. A young gay man with who I had become friendly that week said, this was supposed to be a safe place, a safe space for oppressed people. I have looked the other way several times when you have made insensitive comments, but this, you have definitely crossed the line here. I cannot overlook this. Debbie, one of the residential students, a middle-aged white woman who had been friendly to Fred all week, was so angry. She was shaking and she had tears in her eyes. I'm so disappointed, I can't look at you right now, Debbie said. And with that, she got up from her seat and walked out of the room. By this point, Fred was close to tears himself. From his perspective, all he had done was follow the assignment. He had brought in his favorite children's book. What had he done wrong? Most of us sat in a rather stunned silence. We understood what had happened. Fred clearly didn't understand that the book he had chosen had fairly strong, and as those of us who had more exposure to these ideas saw, the book had clearly racist overtones. But Fred hadn't seen this, and didn't even now understand this. I wanted to speak up on his behalf, but I didn't. The teacher was too intransigent and the class was too angry. I was afraid that if I offered any defense or comfort at all, that I would be attacked in a similar fashion. So I gave in to cowardice at that moment and said nothing. After Debbie stormed out of the room, everyone sat in silence for about 30 seconds before the teacher finally said to a still bewildered Fred, Fred, do you see the pain that you have caused here this morning? I want you to look around the room, and I want you to see the pain on everyone's faces. That is why I would not let you present your book, because it's offensive, because it's painful, and because you should have known better. The fact that you didn't see that and still don't concerns me. You may not have intended any harm, but you have caused a lot of it this morning anyway. And on that note, she released us all for lunch. As soon as she was done, Fred bolted out of the room. And the way he left the room, I wasn't really expecting to see him come back after lunch. But he did return. And as soon as the class reconvened, Fred demanded the floor. "I still don't understand what's wrong with the book that I brought in. Could you please explain it to me?" he said to the teacher. "And that is the problem," the teacher replied. "The problem is that you don't see anything wrong with bringing a racist book to this class. I believe that we have already covered this thoroughly and we are moving on," she concluded harshly, and then she called on the next person to give their presentation. It was the first and only time I saw Fred angry, but he was seething at this point. He was confused and embarrassed and dejected and angry. And the disapproval that was radiating from at least half of the class was palpable. I could feel it. Everyone, it seemed, was done with this ignorant, racist, Carhartt-wearing hayseed from Iowa who didn't even know what sushi was and that you wouldn't find it in Chinatown. Debbie, in fact, was so upset that she didn't come back after lunch, sending the teacher a note saying that she needed to feel safe and she needed time to process the incident before she felt safe returning to the scene of the crime and being in Fred's presence. So through presentations of Charlotte's Web, a cricket in Times Square, and another presentation on Little House in the Big Woods, Fred sat hunched over, arms crossed, head down. His open face was gone, and so were his appreciative nods and smiles. And when we took a bathroom break in the middle of the afternoon, he again bolted from the room. And this time, he didn't return. The next morning, our teacher informed us that Fred had decided not to continue with the class and that he had already departed for Iowa 2 days ahead of schedule. Now, Fred had been signed up for the intensive that was coming up the following week as well, but he didn't come. I never heard, to this day, I've never heard any more about Fred. So I can only surmise what happened. He had clearly been severely wounded by what had taken place, and in his own words, he did not understand what he had done. What had he done to offend people? It isn't hard for me to imagine at all that this experience was the end of his UU ministerial aspirations. In fact, I could see him questioning his place among Unitarian Universalists at all. Perhaps he even rethought the liberal trajectory that his life had been on. Maybe he was rethinking that entirely. The very first time that he had ventured out among us, he was misunderstood, judged, and castigated for an unintentional, and innocent misstep. And even though this happened many years before we had a concept of cancel culture, Fred had nonetheless been canceled at Meadville Lombard Theological School. So, before we go any further, I do want to make clear that I am not defending the Uncle Remus stories, nor am I in any way condoning racist images. I understand why our teacher and our classmates objected to the book. What I don't condone, however, is the way they chose to express their concern. It seemed to me at the time, and it still seems to me today, in hindsight, after even all these years, that it was a rather self-serving and self-aggrandizing opportunity for them to demonstrate to themselves and to everyone else just how enlightened and how woke they all were, another term that wasn't around then. Had the teacher or my fellow classmates really intended to educate and enlighten Fred, they would have chosen a different time and a different method to do so. Fred had been subjected to a teacher-led and sanctioned public shaming, a shaming that robbed him of his dignity. And to what end? You've all heard the story, so I'll take a minute to think. Is there anyone here this morning who just listened to this story that has a prediction that Fred was inspired to positive change and deeper insight by what happened in our class that day? So what happened that day was perhaps the first time, it's at least the first time that I can remember, that I have seen good, enlightened, woke liberals publicly shame others for innocent missteps, but it certainly was not the last. Over the ensuing years, I have seen this happen on a regular basis, and I bet everyone else here this morning has too. A few times, I will admit, it has been me who has done the shaming, and a few times it has been me who has been shamed by others. Think about it. Picture the circles that you travel in and the experiences that you've had. We've probably all been there. Someone makes unwittingly an offensive comment, or they inadvertently use the wrong word or the wrong term, and someone jumps all over them, shaming them and embarrassing them publicly. And then feeling good and self-satisfied about how supposedly justice-oriented they are. In the circles that I travel in, I can tell you that this happens all the time. I see it all the time. Someone uses an expression at a party that they've heard since childhood, which is only offensive to those who know the origins, and someone pounces right on them in front of everyone. Or we unwittingly use an outdated term only to be shamed by someone else for not knowing better. Or we innocently mention that we buy a certain product and we are immediately castigated by half the people in the room because the product contains a harmful ingredient or is produced in an unsustainable way. I would imagine that each and every one of us here this morning has been on the receiving end of this kind of treatment at least once. So, how did it feel? What was it like? I don't know about anyone else, but I have never known anyone who appreciated being publicly shamed for something they did not even know was wrong. Yet, in the enlightened liberal circles that I travel in, I see this kind of thing happen all the time. So my question this morning is, do any of us really believe that we are serving the cause of justice or modeling compassion and tolerance when we do this? Is public shaming really an effective way to further the cause of justice and tolerance? Or is it possible, just possible, that there is a better way? And when we find ourselves participating in this type of behavior, we also have to think, is promoting justice and equity and compassion really our motivation? Or is it sometimes at least our own image that we are really promoting? And one other hard question. Are we harder on people that irritate us than on those we like? I know what my answer is. And as a teacher, you really have to watch that, as all the teachers here know. I could tell right from the very start that our teacher found Fred irritating. I could also tell in the same way that for some reason she took an instant liking to me. So I have to wonder, would I have received the same treatment if I had brought in Walt Disney's Uncle Remus? So, am I saying that we should simply let it pass when people say offensive things? Of course not. But I am saying that there are way better and more effective ways to handle these situations if we are truly interested in furthering the cause of justice and increasing the level of tolerance and compassion that our world so very desperately needs. Now more than ever that I've ever seen in my life, do we need to be careful with our words and always, always keep foremost in our mind that we are trying to further the causes of justice and tolerance and compassion. So I have a little bit of a challenge for everybody this morning, and I'm trying to do it myself. The next time someone commits a gaffe, such as using an outdated term or mentioning that they use a non-sustainable product, say nothing at the time. Simply let the remark pass. When you are alone after the fact, reflect upon what was said and ask yourself a few questions. First of all, I've been trying to ask myself, was it really so bad that I need to mention it at all? A lot of times in hindsight, we realize that these things are minor enough that we don't even need to say anything. If, however, upon reflection, you still feel called to speak, ask yourself this question: why? Why am I doing this? Is it really to further the cause of justice? Or is it because it will make me feel and look good? Is it that? Or do I really genuinely feel called to right a wrong? And next, I think it's important to ask, how likely is this particular person to get it? Am I really going to educate a person, the person who said this? Will I really educate them in a way that is going to add value to their lives and is going to further the cause of equity and justice? If after doing this review, speaking up seems worth it, please, please approach the person privately and gently explain to them the issue that you had with what they said. Always, always making sure to presume innocence and goodwill on their part, and never assuming or stating that they should know better. By and large, the world is inhabited by kind and well-meaning people. In my experience, when this happens, people are nearly always speaking innocently from habit or ignorance. And rarely, if ever, do they intend any offense or harm. They will be much more likely to appreciate and listen to what you have to say if you take them aside privately at a later time, rather than calling them out and embarrassing them on the spot. Most, if not all of us here this morning, were raised in far different times. We grew up in a world that was largely blind to the injustices of racism, sexism, ableism, homophobia, and all the other injustices. We grew up before people were aware of the environmental crisis or understood sustainability. We weren't taught to think about the ethical implications of our purchases. And there are still a lot of us who live in a world that continues to reinforce all of this ignorance, for lack of a better word. Because we have fallen into a place where we are surrounded by people that are conscious of these things, we kind of see things from a different perspective. So when people do these things, they're often just doing what they've always done because no one has ever told them any different. The story that I told you about Fred took place in 1998. So about 1972, it was a big deal for me when I was a kid. They took us to see Song of the South at the movie theater. Uncle Remus went from being a beloved figure in children's literature to a symbol of systemic racism in the span of about 20 years. Now, again, I absolutely and wholeheartedly agree that the racist overtones of these stories need to be uplifted and called out. I am not saying that we shouldn't. But at the same time, I can also understand why someone like Fred, who had lived his life in the world that he had lived in, may not have gotten the memo. Our teacher and my fellow students at Meadville Lombard did Fred a great disservice that day and missed a marvelous opportunity to further the cause of justice and tolerance by the way they mishandled his misstep. As a longtime public school teacher, I can assure you that public shaming, coupled with a refusal to explain what someone has gotten wrong because you believe that they should already know what the problem is not an effective teaching strategy. And it does not work any better with adults than it does with kids. When my partner Michael was in the hospital one time, the technician who put in his IV, it was actually a PICC line, if you know what a PICC line is, and it's a big thick tube that has to go in your arm. And the person was brand new, and she confessed to him ahead of time that she was still practicing. So she did it incorrectly, and she caused permanent damage to his, in fact, now when he has any IVs, they have to go in the other arm because she did something to his arm that made it so this arm is no good. And he was in pain for several days. He was still in pain, and he was still groggy from the anesthesia of a procedure when his friend Nancy visited him in the hospital. Now, Nancy is a kind and well-meaning person, but she is often the first person in the room who will correct people quite pointedly when they say something that she deems politically incorrect. So again, while Michael's in the hospital bed, groggy from anesthesia and in pain, he was describing how the IV had been inserted incorrectly, and he said, "I screamed like a girl." Nancy's demeanor changed instantly from sympathetic to angry. "Michael," she said, "I will not stand here and allow you to demean women and girls." He was still so groggy that he really didn't understand what he had said, but he did instantly understand. We have a different level of understanding for people's emotions, so he immediately did understand that Nancy was angry. He asked her why she was angry, and she replied just as my Meadville Lombard friends had replied to Fred. "I shouldn't even have to explain that," she said, bristling from the affront. Now, at this point, I intervened. I apologized on Michael's behalf and promised Nancy that I would explain to him when he felt better just what was offensive about his remark. So she kind of let it go, but I could tell she was still angry and offended. She stayed about 5 more minutes, shifting her focus away from Michael and ignoring him and making small talk with me before she took her leave. Now, to be clear, I do not believe that Nancy intended any harm. I believe that she was just, as so many of us do, reacting out of habit and a sense of righteous indignation. But think about it. At that moment, in my opinion, she lost sight of something far more important than what words a person chooses. She lost sight of the fact that she was standing behind or beside a hospital bed. And in that hospital bed was her very ill and extremely vulnerable friend. He was sick, too sick and too fragile to be educated at that moment. And her anger caused him distress, a distress, by the way, that lasted for several hours after she left. He understood that she had kind of left in a huff, but he didn't remember what he had said. So let us never forget and never lose sight of the fact that there is no higher calling for justice-oriented people than compassion and kindness. It is more important than using the correct phrasing or buying the right products or reading the right books. The world is indeed full of injustice. But let's also keep in mind that not all of it is intentional and start to learn to see the difference. The world is also full of Freds who are kind and well-meaning and open to change. If we truly want to change hearts and minds, we will never accomplish it by nitpicking and shaming. We will accomplish much more by being models at all times of respect and compassion. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Please remain standing as we extinguish our chalice flame this morning. Let us read together the words printed on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but we keep its light in our hearts with its message of love and justice, taking it outside these worlds to the world we live in until we are together again. As we close our service this morning, I invite you to place a hand over your heart. If you are joining us online, I invite you to turn your settings to gallery view and look upon the faces of those here with you. For those of us in the room, take a moment to look around at those who are here with you this morning. May all our hearts together be blessed as this one has been, by open-hearted sharing, learning from one another, and making beautiful harmonies together. And may we greet everyone we encounter with the same acceptance and grateful kinship until we meet again. Blessed be, and let the people of the church say, Amen.